Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Today, we are pleased to have Alejandro from Ecología y Evolución. Thank you, start.
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to share what the hell I'm doing and what I'm here right now. So when they asked me for present something, for me it's a nightmare because it was like, I don't know, there's many multiple things that we are doing at the same time, and everything is ongoing. There's no ending story, so everything is open. So okay, at the end I'm gonna show. They don't know what I'm doing, so just show a little bit of everything, and then we can discuss and whatever. But so at the end, I decided to just to put an example, at least to have some line of narrative during the presentation. But I will show you just briefly just few snapshots of the projects we are doing, or how to apply this study of the past for the present and the future, or how we deal with this from the zoological point of view. So the first thing, the first slide, of course, has to be to explain what is zooarchaeology. I think it's pretty self-explained about the term, but in any case, but the short answer is zooarchaeology, or the zooarchaeology study the animal remains recovered from archaeological sites. This is the short answer. The longer one is we are more interested in more things than only the bones. If we got the opportunity to have skins, soft tissues, or even go further, like for example, biomolecular, explore the ancient DNA of those bones, we can answer different questions depending on the research aims, of course. So at the end, we put a little bit of everything in the same bag because we have a fragmented record. So animal bones is the easiest approach because it's just straightforward. You got the bone, you study the bone, the morphology, you can pinpoint the species, and that's something. But this is not our objective. We are not, of course, we are loving with the bones. It could be enough for us. But usually we got research questions about these bones. And what we can get is what we want to study is the relationships of humans and animals over time. So we want to grasp some ideas of how they deal with these animals, how they change the environment, what they put, what was the impact of the humans, or even which interactions or relationships they got with the animals. Because zooarchaeology comes from archaeology, and so we are from social sciences. So we got the opportunity studying bones to explore in depth, for example, the ecology and the biology of extinct species, but also domestic species that are still alive. So there's no purpose on exploring in depth that kind of animals. So usually what we got in those scenarios where are domestic animals involved, we get ideas of how humans or our own history, so how humans interacted with the environment during the times, but also different things like, for example, today we published something about turdus. I don't know the thrushes in English. They are tortal in Spanish. They were studying these bones from a Roman site. So at the end we started studying just those bones. We can, with putting together all the different lines of evidence from the ceramic, the context of the tavern, and whatever, we can get insights about how was the life in the Roman city. For example, they were using this small seasonal animal like a hunt for a snack, a short snack in the city. So we have like a snapshot of that live or the life in the Roman city 2,000 years ago. So this is more answer about history and social science, but we are studying the animal bones. Sometimes we study an extinct species and we can get inside some about the ecology or maybe the species, of course. So this is very wide, the ramifications you can get from studying those bones or different remains of the animals in the past. So at the end, of course, we want to reconstruct the ecosystems, understand the long term, especially in the islands. It's very important to see how it has changed during the time. So to focus on just one explanation in this case, extinction is very straightforward. I mean, studying when some species disappears. And of course, there's no point to explanation of the importance of the extinction and the long-term ecological effects they got, because I know for sure that you know better than me. But the studying the extinction in the past helped us for studying the present because they establish baselines for rewilding, to see tipping points or moments that it's like having a record of the past. Like when you are in a doctor, the first thing that they see to see that you got a problem right now. Okay, check the first thing that the history of that guy. So we want to reconstruct that history. What happened in the past, if the problem that we facing today happened in the past, and how the humans deal, if they deal in some way with that, or what happened in other scenarios. So we have like complementary models, different islands, different scenarios, different stories that we can put in the modeling today. So it's not only a problem from the past, something a funny story to tell to the kids, and so we can use that information. Of course, it's very hard to reconstruct that. It's very straightforward to say, we studied the past and then we can get the full picture. Usually just the history or the archaeology is like a puzzle without, well, you don't have even the figure of the picture of what we are trying to reconstruct. You have you try to make sense with the pieces, the small pieces, but at the end, little by little, you get some insights on that. Why islands? Well, it's also very, I think there's no need here, but usually they are very clear, even for us archaeologists. Some processes are very clear for us in the islands, because what happened in the continent, if there's a distribution of a mammal, I don't know, a terrestrial mammal, it could be a shift in the distribution because of the pressure of the climate, of the change of the environment, and can move another place. So you cannot find that species in that place. Maybe they move another places, or there was a natural movement. But in the islands, everything we put like different species. For example, in the case of the Balearic Islands, what we know is they cannot arrive to the islands by natural ways. So we know that for sure, and we will show you that they put some species that got an impact in the island is because someone took it and moved it there. So there's a process that we can detect very clearly. And of course, also the species that were endemic of the islands, they were very unique because they were isolated for millions of years. So they are very special, vulnerable for some processes, especially with the human impact. That's something that we're gonna see now. So, okay, very basic question. When that happened, when the extinction happened, it's a very straightforward question, but to be honest, it's very hard because the idea of having an extinction timeline, it depends on the record you got. And then the idea is, okay, we establish the moment, and then we can correlate with other different lines. For example, we can see for paleoproxies, like for example, there's a change in vegetation at that time, and now that we know that the extinction is in that time, we can correlate, speculate about the correlations, or maybe there's an introduction of a species that has is a threat for that species that got extinct. So we can correlate these things. But to pinpoint the timeline of the extinction is very hard because we got this, the paleontologists say, signal leaf effect. It just is, the record is biased within, I mean, it's not complete. When you pinpoint a target species and you date it, you got that date for that species. But it's very optimistic to say that you're going to find the last, for example, Myotragus here in Balearic Islands. You're going to see the last one and you're going to pinpoint and date it. And of course, you're not going to have the first human that put foot in the Balearic Islands. You're not going to get that remains. Probably it's going to happen 100 years and some random guy in a cave fall down and then you get that data. But there's a gap always. So the straightforward way is just dating. Okay, this is the last record we got of that species, but we know that for sure the extinction happened after that point. So usually the people, what they are doing now is modeling this with observation. There's two approaches. More Bayesian one with the OTSCAL program. It is from Oxford, modeling radiocarbon datings. It implements a lot of different things, like for example, as you know, for the Bayesian, you put priors, constraints, it depends on the sequence, you can constrain the dates, so you can make different models. But in the case of the extinctions, you just put all the observations, put in the phase and try to get when the disappearance of the species happened, take into account the data you got before that point. And with the frequentist approach, is the same, but it's different in the way that they compute. And they use also this program, well, this package from R that has this long name, Crew. And they use different modeling, but it's all based on the same radiocarbon observation. You put it together, and you got this record, more or less. You got the last one, and they try to infer the window. It's inspired in, I think it's in some ways in other places that they use for the actual extinction of species in the woods, for example. They try to configure an effort to try to find that species alive, taking pictures or whatever, and they try to compute the effort and the observation they got. After a while, if there are no observations, even increasing the effort to try to find that species, they more or less compute a window when probably it's extinct species. So they use the same logic, but with radiocarbon observations or measurements. So to put the two examples, Myotragus from the Balearic Islands and the Prolagus, just to show you what is right now the standard or the state of the art, sorry, of the two species. Of course, we use just radiocarbon dating. There's a lot of different ways to date things, but usually with animal bones and in the Holocene, the pretty straightforward and the best standard is using radiocarbon dating. And you just select some species that are very clear, identified. The chemical measures of the observation has some protocols of the qualities. Of course, you just pinpoint those good data to model these extinction windows. Well, I think more or less everyone knows the Myotragus. I guess is the only got with different species we got here, and everyone is very interested. But it's very an animal, very emblematic animal of insular adaptation, because he went like for over 5.3 million years isolated in the Balearic Islands. There were no connection like happens with Sicily or other places during the Holocene. In the Pleistocene, they were connected with the mainland. And the Balearic Islands were over all these years isolated. So the species that got imprisoned on that island, they adapted to the circumstances that way. And there were no predators, so they were usually what happened with the insular animals are slow growth, metabolism, they live longer. They usually use different strategies of food. They're more generalist, sometimes just to grasp a little bit of everything. So at the end, this is a good strategy to survive, at least for 5.3 millions. But the problem is they are also very focused on that environment. So when something happens, when the humans arrive, this is a new threat that they are not prepared to deal with. So usually what happens is they disappear very clearly. In the case of the Myotragus, as it was so different, when the humans arrive, what we see is a very clear abrupt model. Like when the humans arrive, they go extinct. That doesn't happen with other species in the rest of the Mediterranean. So it's also a good signal. Even we want to explore the Myotragus extinction, we are also having insight about when happened the human arrival in the Balearic Islands, because it's a biological signal. Okay, there's after a few millions of years, the endemic fauna is going extinct, so probably something is happening right now. Oh, well, everyone knows this documentary that I want to recommend, because Tonio, another person from the media, were involved, and I think they put it here sometime. So if you got the opportunity to take a look at this documentary, Dorothea Bate was a pioneer in paleontology, not only in Balearic Islands, through the world. One of the first female scientific paleontologists, and she did a very good discoveries at that time, especially, for example, in our case, the Myotragus. People ask me about the causes of the extinction of the Myotragus, because some people have some insights. Like, for example, they were humans hunting the Myotragus. Today, after we got like several million many bones and different sites, we didn't even find any bone with a cut mark. that this doesn't happen with, for example, in New Zealand with the moas, they got plenty of bones with battery marks and everything. So what happened in the Balearic Islands? We don't have cut marks. There's people that say that they were using the bones for doing objects. This is natural parts of the animal with a human modification. And also even in this case of the holocaust, they were saying that these marks here, some guys said, oh, this is human modified. They were domestic Myotragus. They were put it in a pen all together. This is just to avoid they kill themselves. This is just osteophagites. There are Myotragus chewing the horncrows because they need the minerals. So usually, sometimes they eat themselves, but just for the minerals, of course. But there's no clear signal, human signal in the animal of Myotragus that you can select and say, ah, this is the evidence. So what we got is only the human arrival of the humans and the disappearance of the Myotragus is at more or less at the same time. So we can go to the Balearic paradox. It's a term that they put it, the prehistorians and the archaeologists, because usually the arrival of the human arrival here in the Balearic Islands was very late in the context of the Mediterranean. For example, Cyprus was around 12,000 BC, and here was 2000 BC. So it's very late, even with you compare with Corsica and Sardinia. So if they even do a regression from the Near East to the West Mediterranean, they like linear regression, like very clear the pattern. You see the Cyprus and then Crete and then Corsica, Sardinia. Shit, Balearic Island wasn't in the line. It's like an outlier. So they call it as the Balearic paradox. We don't know what happened, why it was so late, but for sure Myotragus was fine for a while until the humans arrived at the 2000. This is the gap, why you call it the gap. For example, this is a radiocarbon dating, and there's another radiocarbon dating. This is the first human arrival. We got an interval. We don't have a point in time. Usually you have an interval, and you have to work with that. And with the last Myotragus the same. Of course, if you want to be very, I don't know, very interpretative, you can take this point and this point, and the it's very close. But also you want to put this here. So any point in time in the interval could be. I mean, we are not clear. We just have this 90%, 95% of interval. So that's very close, but of course we are not touching it, and we don't have any signs. So at the end, what happened is we have intervals of the distinction. More or less, it depends on the model. It could be later and earlier. It depends on how they model this window. So sometimes these models doesn't take into account if this is an abrupt extinction or if it was an erosion with time. So of course, of the modeling depends on these variables. But at the end, what we know is this is the extinction of Myotragus. This is the extinction of other species that were endemic. We are not talking about today because we have less data. Like Nomis and Nesiotitis, other species that were present in the Balearic Islands. More or less, the intervals, it depends, of course, of the observation. You got more data, you got better estimations. And in this case, we are disappearing here, and this is the disappearance. And this is more or less the first proxies of the human arrival, like domestic animals like dog, pig, cow, whatever you try to date, all of them go to this interval. Like they show up at that moment and they get extinct at the moment. So they are close, but we don't have an interaction, the ultimate cause. So people speculate, of course, that when they arrive, the humans arrived, they were maybe not overhunting that animal, but maybe the goats or the species that are close to the Myotragus, but separated for millions of years. What happened was they bring some disease of some pathogens that Myotragus weren't capable of deal with. Another example, Prolagus sartus, I was studying with Marie Curie. Different story. This is like it's not a rodent, but a cotonid. It's like you can say a rabbit, more or less. It looks like that. I mean, it's very small, and they coexisted with humans for several millennia. So the humans arrived in Corsica and Sardinia. That species was only present in those two islands, also the same pattern, and an animal that arrived there. And with the time, the evolution changed something. In this case, they were bigger and they got robust skull. There are some differences with the continental parent familiars of that species, but at the end, they were adapted to Corsica and Sardinia. And in this case, the funny story is this: we got writing sources. My travels was in the Bronze Age. There were writing sources. So what happened with the Prolabus is there's some sources you can put with the archaeological evidence, try to figure out what happened. And even classical historians like the Polybius, they were talking about in Corsica, there was a kind of hair that doesn't taste like hair. So it's interesting, but could be a mistaken when something that is not relevant. But other inferences like this in even the medieval, the Fazio, the Ghibertis talk about this solifugi. It makes sense because Ocotonids, especially in Mongolia and other places, they try to avoid the sun or to be exposed during the day. They are more crepuscular. So maybe it was a strategy of the Prolabus, we don't know. But the Francesco Ceti is another one that I will revisit now for a case in Tabolara. So at the end, what we got is indirect evidence in Corsica and Sardinia. What we wanted to do is to date directly those bones on Corsica and Sardinia and try to figure out if, for example, we got two islands with the same species, if they disappear after, I don't know, 10,000 years, they disappear at the same time. So at the end, if we disappear at the time, now we can explore what happened and why it happened simultaneously in two islands. Just to keep it simple, in this case, we have evidence of the hunting of these species for several millennia. They were hunting because it's like a rabbit. You can take advantage of that. And this is burn marks, broken on the legs, burn marks on the, so they reconstruct the way, but it's very basic way to roast a rabbit. And they got plenty of them during the whole prehistory. But at the end, some moment in time, they disappear. Of course, they putting together correlate things like, okay, the arrival of black ratus was maybe a threat for them, changes in the environment. We are talking about the Roman period, the Greek period. There was also with the paleoenvironmental proxies, we can see the differences in the vegetation, in the environment. Like, for example, they are trying to, there's a agriculture intensification, so the landscape changed. So maybe those different things put together was a threat. But at the end, we wanted to see if there was at least at the same time Corsica, Sardinia. In Sardinia, in Corsica, right now we are moving this interval, like Roman period, but could be even late Roman. So it's just a point in time to keep it in mind. And this more or less correlates with the writing sources of Polybius that were present. So it makes sense that at least they were alive when Polybius was in Corsica. So it could be a case that they were telling the truth. And with Sardinia, there's less data, and nowadays we are just late Iron Age, like 1,000 years before Corsica. But it could be a bias of the record, so we have to explore more of this. But it's not synchronic. So something is happening in Sardinia, and then happens in Corsica. It could be different scenarios, different explanations, of course. But from the beginning, it is different. And more or less, this is the correlation of the dating we got with the Zwartel record, that we can see the Prolabus is present during the different chronologies, and during this Punic period, they disappear from the record. So more or less, we are close, but we don't know why. But what happened with Tabolara? Tabolara is this small island in the northeast of Sardinia. And we got these writing sources about Francesco Ceti talking about in the 18th century, talking about the Prolabus, or not a species, different misurati topi, like a rat or something like that. Some people, well, they didn't believe that, of course. Some paleontologists that they tried to go to Tabolara in the 20th century, go there to try to find alive the Prolabus, maybe it was around there in the island. They went and they find bones, just bones, animal bones of that species, but maybe Ceti in the 18th century was right. Other researchers say, no, it was 18th century. We know that the brown rat at that time, they colonized the expansion, the dispersal of that species was throughout Europe. So maybe was related with the rats, and they got confused. But they're from a taxonomical point of view, they're different, totally different rats and ocotonids. But make the case that maybe that guy was a naturalistic, maybe he had a bad day that day, I don't know. But they propose that. But at the end, the answer is very straightforward. I mean, people are saying that the Prolapus maybe was alive for a longer time in this small island, like a relic population. And so the thing is, okay, we got bones, we can date it and explore this. I mean, it's a very basic question. And we got these materials from Basel. They were collected for 469. Was a paleontologist in the 19th century. They went to Tabolara, also looking for the alive Prolapus. But they took some samples and put it in the Basel Museum. We went there. They allow us to date some of the bones, of course. They give us this box. It was the leftovers, or something that you're not going to put in the museum. So, okay, you can use that. But it's okay, because we just need to destroy the sample and for sure to be sure that it was from Prolapus. So we dated these things, some of bones, and they were around the Neolithic. So imagine we are in Corsica, we are here, and Sardinia here. So, okay, there's no news here. Okay. So at the end, we did another one. It was, okay, first century, it's okay, but it's not close enough to 18th century. And at the end, we dated more bones and they were getting close. They were medieval. So it wasn't at the moment of Ceti, but it was close enough to say that for more than 1,000 years after the extinction in Sardinia and in Corsica as well, in Tabolara, very close, there was a relic population, but we don't know if Ceti saw what they saw, but it makes the point that could be they almost did it. They maybe, but no. At the end, we know that now we can explore that. We are also exploring the Asian DNA to see the differences between the different populations. There's some insights on that, but we're getting more close on that. This was a project that we are getting. You are just presenting the radiocarbon data. Imagine we want to explore the diet of those animals. We want to know more about the biology of those animals, the ecology. So we are, as for example, Biotragus. After all these years, then someone asked me what they were eating. Everyone says buxus, a lot of buxus. There was some publication of that. But if you explore other places like in the south of the Mallorca, you got coprolites. You can explore the diet because you got the ship itself, so you can explore that. And we see that there's no pollen record of buxus because there's different areas. So even that basic question, we don't know for sure. We know a specific exploration of the microweb, the isotopes of the diet of the bones, also these proxies. So at the end, we want to put more together. But we are just having that when. And this is one of the tips. And just to give you a glimpse of other projects, for example, the Balearic Islands is a beautiful example when humans have an impact on the environment. And it was written from the Roman period. They already said that in the Balearic Islands, someone had the brilliant idea to bring 2 rabbits in an environment without predators, with agriculture. Of course, wasn't a bad idea, and after a while, they got problems with the harvest of the plants. So they tried to get help from the Emperor Augustus. They introduced some predators. That was the natural response of that. Of course, if Australia did read that, they can avoid that mess that they did in the 19th century, but it was already there. So we wanted to explore the archaeological record that. We know that for the writing sources, there's a story. Okay, let's explore that. In this case, is one of the cases. This is one of the earliest ecological disruptions that we know from the writing sources. So what we saw now is, we can explore the dating of the animals, the arrival in the Balearic Islands, and we know for sure that Podarcis, when we dated, and in the archaeological record, they disappeared. For example, in Mallorca, Menorca at that time, the rabbits are still present. They didn't care about the weasels. But what happened is Podarcis and Alites, the midwife told, they locally disappeared some islands or some areas at that time around the arrival of the whistle that we also know when they arrive. And there were no cats, other predators. So we can put together pieces and say, okay, and it makes sense if you see the distribution where Podactis is nowadays, the green areas, and the brown areas where the whistle is present. Where there's whistle, there's no lizard. The thing is, sometimes the humans make some good things without knowing. Like, for example, in this case, of course, the natural dispersal of the Neorum was the lizard, and without this disruption, could be a threat for the plant, but they also introduced at the same time, or very close to the introduction of the whistle, the marts. And the marts we know now from the people that I think in the departments that were studying, that they are also natural dispersal of these plants. So at the end, the solution was in the same that the mess up they did when the introduction of the whistles. And another example that they are studying right now is the midwife toad, and we know that also disappear we find it bones of these species everywhere in Mallorca, Menorca, when it's before the Roman period. But when the whistle appears, they disappear only in the mountains in Mallorca, like today, and in Menorca they disappear. In this case, it's very funny because the description of the species was first through paleontological record. They found the bones. They described that species. They thought that was extinct, and they find it alive in the mountains. So it was the other way around. That usually happens. And almost did it with the Prolagus, but no, it's not alive at the end. But what we wanted to do with this project, this funding from the government Balearic, is try to characterize the genetics of the species that got extinct in Menorca, and try to compare with the alive populations in Mallorca. Just in case, I'm an archaeologist. I'm not gonna recommend anything like put the midwife from Mallorca to Menorca because the environment is totally different, predators are different. I mean, bad idea. But at least we know now if they are very close, different, or are compatible, at least from the genetic point of view. Of course, there's more questions like the ecology was different and everything. Even the environment was comparable Mallorca, Menorca at that time. We don't know for sure, but at least we are, little by little from the zoological record or the paleontological record, trying to provide new useful information for that kind of research. So at the end, there's multiple lines of evidence. I mean, we're trying to, with the course they are doing in the paleoenvironmental records with the sediments, they are of course doing the SEDA DNA, like environmental DNA, trying to grasp everything that is present at that time. It could be useful, for example, if you want to see the sequence of the changes of the environment, not only the change of the landscape, but also the presence of some species, like for example, when the Myotragus disappears from the record, or when the humans appears. You don't need the radiocarbon, the bone and the radiocarbon dating of that bone. You can use the DNA that is present in the sediments. But of course, there's also some caveats and some problems as well. As always with archaeology, there's not always a straightforward answer to that. But at the end, is interdisciplinary by itself. Archaeology can interact with everything. Depends on the research question you got. Sometimes you can explore differences in fishes. Like for example, overfishing. You got fishes that were recovered in the 2,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, before humans, after some period. So you can explore from the point of view the DNA, the trophic levels through the isotopes. You can explore these things and put it in the scenario, in the modeling of the nowadays problematics. So at the end, the interaction is multiple, and I hope with the time we can find ways to interact, because I'm sure there's plenty of things to do, and as you see, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, that's all. Thank you. Any questions now or later?
So when okay, I know nothing about this. Okay, so I'm just gonna say my question.
Yeah,
it's gonna be stupid, but it doesn't matter. So you have focused on changes in, say in this case was fauna due to humans, human activity, because they brought in, for example, some species that were not there. But obviously, this thing can also happen naturally, right? So meaning, for example, in the case of Sicily, you could have something, a connection that closes and then opens and then closes. And so with the ice ages, you can have bridges that form and then. So how different are the changes that happen because of these events from changes that happen because of human introduction of foreign species?
You see a very close relationship between the isolation of those places and the abrupt change. For example, in case of Sicily, we know from the paleontological record that some changes happen when they connect with the Iberian, the Italian peninsula. But usually, what happens with some true islands, like for example in the Pacific or maybe here in the Mediterranean, you see the changes are huge when they happen, because without that connection, the natural arrival of animals, it's impossible. I mean, a whistle cannot swim until here. It could use rafting, like for example, a log in the sea you can, but you need two at least, female and male, and then when they arrive, they find a way to survive. So, and what happened with the paleontological record, you are confident because after millions of years, you see a very clear pattern, and then it's a coincidence if you want, but it's the model is showing you changes. So in the Balearic Islands, what happened is everything goes messed up when the humans show up, and with Corsica and Sardinia, they are not connected, but they are more close to the mainland. There's species that got extinct very quickly, and others that they coexisted. So at the end, you have to take every case for itself and try to figure out. But the general model is islands very isolated, huge impact. It happens with the Pacific, Caribbean, and when they are some connections, even with humans or natural, they got. It's like the animals we got in Africa. They coexisted with the humans from the beginning of the existence of the humans. They they have a lot of different species, and they're not huge extinctions events at that time because they are used to deal with the humans. They got the defenses, natural defenses with them. But in places where are living like in the kindergarten, like, yeah, that's amazing life here. What happened is when the humans arrive, even if it's not overhunting or direct evidence of that, they try to, the first thing when they arrive to an island like Balearic Islands, you can see in the paleoenvironmental record, is they burn everything. There's charcoal everywhere in the course, because you see that this is mess, we need clearance, we need to build things, and we are still in that process, but they did it, and you can see very clearly. So even if they don't want to cause that extinction, the impact is huge. I mean, you are putting predators, competitors, disease, changes in the landscape, even hunting sometimes. So yeah, I mean, maybe there could be a question. It was in 1 year, 10 years, 100 years. We don't know because of the resolution, but it was quick for sure. I don't know if you answered that question.
How can you discriminate if it was not the rats that killed the polar seas, but the whistle?
Because the whistles arrive before the rats. That's one of the questions. No, it's a good question. And to be honest, I try to be very straightforward. Yeah, we know the answer, but there's always a thing. For example, why not? Now we know that the rats arrive around the 2nd century BC. This is when the Romans arrive here. And the whistle, now we see that this is before, a little bit before the Romans. So the Romans were describing a process of mesa with the rabbits, but the rabbits were already present just a few years before. That what we think now is the writing sources is just echoing something that happened a little bit before. Rabbits were before the Romans, the whistles were before the Romans, the rats only arrived when the Romans arrived. And why at that time? Because we see the expansion of the rat through all Europe. What we know for sure now is why they spread at that time very quickly. Is even they were present from several centuries before in the Near East, because they come from Asia, is because there was a change in the technology of the boats. The cargos, they were getting bigger. There were also more interaction moving. The Romans were everywhere, so more interaction, bigger boats with these places where they can hide. So perfect environment, and also cities. When they arrive, the rats need sometimes this ecological place that we can survive more or less comfortable. And was the cities, the Roman cities. There was the perfect environment for the rats. They got plenty of everything. They don't need even try to find food for around. So we know, for what we know for the sequence of appear and disappear, we think is whistle. Could be also snakes. They are the candidate, but there was no record of snakes in the Balearic Islands, talking about Mallorca, Menorca at that time. It could happen, and it also happens. I'm telling you this story, and tomorrow I'm gonna find snakes. So that species in the Roman period, I'm gonna date it, and yeah, the snake were present. So another candidate. Yeah, it's a never-ending story. It's always, but you try to refine. And to be honest, after a while, you try to see the pattern is not only happening here, it's happening in other islands, different groups. So at the end, you got a complete scenario, more or less.
Do you know anything about insects? Can you
Yeah, that's a good
work
thing.
with the kinds of insects?
Sometimes the problem with the recovery of bones and other stuff, like, for example, insects, is usually there's no one specialized on that. And what happened with archaeologists, they are in the sun with bad money trying to dig in. And when you ask them, okay, take care of the samples, I mean, there's tiny things like otoliths, for example, or the fish with the fishes. If you don't pinpoint that and say, hey, man, take that, they usually don't care. They are looking for pottery. Even the animal bones, huge bones, they were throwing away just 20 years ago, because they thought, we already know from the writing sources the Romans were eating lamb, cattle, whatever you want. There's no point. When we started to study that, we saw that, for example, the fallow deer was present here for centuries. And what happened is, when you select the DNA of those fallow deer, were not only the European, that is everywhere right now in the Europe, they were from Persia. And it makes sense, because when they show up, fallow deer here was related with the Byzantines, because Balearic was Byzantine, and the Byzantines were present there. So they are brought everything from there. So at the end, the insects and even the other things like parasitology, they are trying to figure out some of the records, but it has to be focused on from the beginning. When did you dig? For example, in Vienadris, in Menorca, they find a cave with a lot of burials from the Bronze Age. The preservation was very good, even some tissues and the hair. So they go straight to the parasitology of the samples of around these areas, and they find that the people, they were eating kidneys, because they were those parasites were related with that. The milk was not in a good preservation, so it has parasites related with that. And the insects, for example, there were maybe some extinctions. The beavery, the male trout maybe has a key role in the environment of Balearic Islands, and they were related with some vegetation changes after that disappeared, and maybe they were related with insects that were pollinators or whatever, and we don't know. No one studied that. So at the end, it depends having the record, first thing, and when you have the record, the resources that someone can take. But for example, in your team, that maybe you've got the expertise of the anatomical, taxonomical. If we got record, maybe you can explore at least if the species were the same. But for sure, that when someone start to look for that, they will find, I mean, for sure, the new species that were extinct, or different species that were present at that time and not now, that kind of stuff. It could be interesting also for reconstruct the environment.
No more questions
No.
for Alex?
No.
We can leave it here. Thank you.